Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we have a really disturbing case out of the United States. It involves a psychiatrist, someone meant to heal, who allegedly used their position. Well, let's just say not for healing, more like manipulation, leading to something truly shocking. Our main source is a detailed account from a YouTube video transcript, which really lays out the timeline and the people involved.
Yeah, and typically, a psychiatrist counsels people, diagnoses conditions, offers treatment. It's all about helping. But this case flips that entirely. It asks, what happens when that professional trust is abused? When someone uses their power, supposedly, to control a patient and push them towards violence.
That's exactly what we're digging into. We want to unpack this complex story, understand the psychology, and see how things went from a diagnosis to, well, these terrible accusations. We'll follow the twists and turns. Okay, let's start with the patient, Jake Nolan. So, Jake Nolan grew up in New York, Long Island, pretty wealthy family, privileged background, 2 older siblings. People described him as a sweet kid, polite, kind, but underneath, things were already difficult mentally.
Extremely difficult, and from a very young age. He got an ADHD diagnosis at just 5 years old. Then, around 15, things got much worse. Severe mood swings, skipping school, just no motivation. That led to diagnoses of generalized anxiety disorder and depression. But 17, that was a huge turning point. He attempted self-harm, threatened family with a knife. That led to hospitalization, and that's when he received the bipolar disorder diagnosis, which, involves those extreme highs and lows, really impacting judgment.
Wow, so many diagnoses so young. That paints a picture of a really complex, difficult mental state.
Absolutely, and that complexity, that history of seeking help, combined with the instability of bipolar disorder, can make someone very reliant on therapeutic figures. When you're in that kind of internal chaos, someone offering answers, offering support, they become incredibly influential. It's fertile ground for potential manipulation, sadly.
And things didn't get easier after high school, after 2012. He was on a lot of medication. The source mentioned up to 30 different psychiatric drugs.
Yeah, that's extreme polypharmacy. It often suggests a very complex treatment-resistant situation. And that amount of medication inevitably brings side effects, often severe ones. Yeah. Which tragically pushed Jake towards self-medicating with alcohol and illicit drugs. Kind of a vicious cycle.
It really sounds like it. And it all came to a head when he was about 19 at university. The university actually called his parents. He'd missed 2 whole weeks of classes. His parents found him basically shut in his own dorm room, just completely overwhelmed by his conditions. His mother, Debbie, was understandably desperate. She needed help for Jake. And that's when she thought of her cousin, Pamela Buckbinder. So, Pamela Buckbinder. Debbie's niece, actually, 40 years old at the time, a very successful, reputable psychiatrist in New York, trained in Manhattan, looked like the perfect person to turn to.
Right. On the surface, very accomplished. But her personal life had its own complications. She was married to Michael White, another psychiatrist, also successful. They had a son, Kader. But back in 2009, Pamela and Michael separated. And they were deep in a really bitter custody battle over Kader. At this point, Kader was living with Pamela Monday to Friday in her apartment near Greenwich Village.
So Debbie reaches out to Pamela, her cousin, the psychiatrist, and Pamela makes this offer that sounds, well, incredibly generous. She says Jake can come live with her for 2 or 3 months, no charge. She promised therapy, managing his meds, keeping him off substances. And Debbie, trusting family, trusting the professional title, she agreed.
And Jake was willing too. He'd known Pamela since he was a kid, apparently. He felt comfortable, maybe hopeful that she could be the one to finally help him stabilize.
So Jake moves in with Pamela, and while he's living there, he gets really close to her, and also to her son, Kader. It seems like he's maybe finding a place, a bit of stability.
Well, Pamela certainly fostered that closeness. She took a, let's say, significant emotional step. She made Jake the godfather to Kader. Now, in Christian tradition, that's a huge deal. It implies protection, responsibility. It positioned Jake as this vital figure in Kader's life, almost paternal. He even reportedly said later he loved Kader more than his own life. That shows just how deep that emotional connection, or perhaps leverage, became.
And while this bond is forming, that custody battle between Pamela and Michael is still going on in the background. In 2012, the court makes a decision, shared custody. Kader stays with Pamela during the week. Michael gets weekends. Michael also has to pay child support. Standard stuff, maybe.
Except for one detail Pamela insisted on adding to that agreement. A really crucial detail in hindsight. She required Michael to take out a life insurance policy for $1.5 million. Kader was the beneficiary, naturally, but Pamela was named as the administrator of the funds, meaning she would control the money if Michael died, and she made sure it was non-revocable. Michael couldn't change it later. He agreed, maybe didn't think much of it at the time, but it certainly casts a dark shadow now.
A very dark shadow. Which brings us to the events of November 12th, 2012, a Monday. Michael White starts his day normally, drops Kader off at daycare, heads to his apartment, which doubled as his clinic to see patients.
Then, completely out of the blue, Jake Nolan shows up at Michael's door. Michael didn't know him well, just that he was Pamela's relative, her patient. He probably figured Jake was there needing psychiatric help himself.
But Jake had a story ready. He said Pamela sent him. Something about needing custody documents for Kader's school. He was carrying this big duffel bag, and he insisted on bringing it into Michael's office. Michael felt uneasy, even thought maybe Jake was trying to record him or something, but eventually he let him bring the bag in.
And the moment they were inside the office, everything changed. Jake pulls a sledgehammer out of the bag, lunges right at Michael's head. Michael just barely dodged it, took the hit on his shoulder instead. Then Jake drops the hammer, pulls out a kitchen knife, and just starts stabbing Michael. Legs, arms, neck, stomach. Wildly. A brutal, frenzied attack.
It's horrific. But Michael, despite being badly hurt, he's physically bigger than Jake. He manages to fight back, tries to get the knife away, and that's when he sees it. He recognizes the knife. It was one he had bought for Pamela, a Christmas gift.
Just imagine that realization. After managing to stab Jake once in the collarbone self-defense, trying to get away, Michael runs. He gets out of the apartment screaming for help down the hall. Neighbors come out. Michael collapses, bleeding heavily, probably thinking, okay, help is here.
But here's where it gets even stranger. Jake doesn't chase him. He doesn't flee immediately. Instead, he pulls out his phone and takes a selfie, with Michael lying there, unconscious, in a pool of blood.
Just unbelievable. Both Jake and Michael end up being rushed to the hospital. And the police, of course, immediately start processing the scene at Michael's apartment.
And the evidence they find there is pretty damning. The sledgehammer, obviously, in the office. DNA tests later confirm Michael's blood on the head, Jake's DNA on the handle. Pretty clear cut. The knife is there too. Police go to Pamela's apartment, confirm it's hers, though she denies knowing anything about it at this stage. But inside that duffel bag, it wasn't just the weapons. Cigarette packs, zip ties, 2 pillows, a bag from Home Depot, and a hand-drawn map.
And that map was significant. It showed Michael's apartment location, the office layout, even escape routes. It screamed premeditation. This wasn't some spontaneous outburst.
Definitely not. And that Home Depot bag, that was the key. Police track it to a store in Chelsea, Manhattan. They pull the security footage, and there's Jake, clear as day, buying the sledgehammer and the zip ties. But the real shocker, Pamela Buckbinder is right there with him, and she pays for everything.
That should have been it, right? Direct link. But incredibly, the police were hesitant initially. Maybe it was her profession, her reputation. They seemed focused on Jake's known mental illness, thinking perhaps he was delusional, making things up about Pamela's involvement. So at first, they only charged Jake.
Which is surprising given the footage, and then another unexpected twist. Jake gets out on bail, $200,000 posted by his wealthy family. He was even allowed to fly down to Miami. But being away from Pamela, maybe away from that intense situation, his mental state just plummeted. Multiple suicide attempts during that time. It sounds like he was really falling apart.
It does. But that crisis period, strangely enough, seems to have led to a breakthrough. He started seeing a new psychiatrist, someone not connected to Pamela. And as he got therapy, his thinking started to clear. And then he contacted the police himself. He was ready to tell them everything, that Pamela was the mastermind, that she had brainwashed him.
Around the same time, November 2013, Michael White files a lawsuit against both Pamela and Jake. And Michael's lawsuit brings that $1.5 million life insurance policy front and center. He points out the attack happened just 4 days after Pamela insisted he take out that non-revocable policy. He lays out his belief. Jake was just a tool, a pawn. Pamela wanted him dead for the money and for full custody of Kader.
And Michael's legal team uncovered more concrete evidence. Remember that hand-drawn map found in Jake's bag? Handwriting analysis confirmed it matched Pamela's handwriting. Meticulously. Plus, they found records of extensive communication calls, texts between Jake and Pamela right before and right after the attack, including, unbelievably, Jake sending Pamela that selfie he took with Michael's bleeding body. It painted a very clear picture of her involvement, her direction.
So Jay's defense team goes all in on this. They argue Pamela, the trusted psychiatrist, planned it all. They emphasize how she exploited Jake's severe mental illness, his vulnerability, his age. He was only 19. They pointed out Jake had nothing to gain financially from the $1.5 million his family was rich already. His motive, they claimed, was purely about pleasing Pamela, making her happy, keeping that family unit she'd built around him intact.
And Jake's testimony in court March 2016 was just chilling. He laid out the manipulation step by step. He talked about how Pamela was initially so affectionate, making him feel special, even having him sleep in the same bed with her and Kader sometimes, building that intense sense of value and belonging. Then came the lies. Constant stories about Michael being abusive, violent, a threat to her and Kader, convincing Jake he had to be eliminated for them to be safe and happy, for her to get full custody. And it's critical to remember, Michael had no history of violence. He paid child support. These were complete fabrications by Pamela. Jake described the morning of the attack, Pamela waking him, telling him she loved him, praising him, saying today was the day to take care of everything, to get Michael out of our lives. He described buying the hammer and ties the night before at Home Depot with her, discussing other horrible methods, chemicals, burning before settling on the hammer and knife. He said Pamela cried while they packed the bag, telling him both their lives would be so much better once Michael was gone. It's just methodical, calculated manipulation.
After hearing all that, Jake was found guilty of attempted murder. He got a sentence of 9.5 years. But Pamela, she was still free. For a while longer, anyway.
Yeah, it took until October 19, 2017 for her to finally be arrested. Attempted murder, assault. And significantly, when they arrested her, she had luggage packed, important documents ready. It looked very much like she was about to flee the country, maybe head to Canada.
Her court appearances sound like quite the saga, too. October 20th, 2017, she pleads not guilty. Claims Jake's delusional, she had nothing to do with it. Then, years later, September 2022, she pleads guilty. But just a month later, October 2022, she tries to take it back. Claims she was disoriented during transport when she made the plea. The court didn't buy it, though. They denied her request to withdraw the guilty plea.
So finally, the verdict stood. Pamela Bookbinder, 52 by then, guilty, sentenced to 11 years in prison, plus 5 years probation afterwards. And crucially, her medical license was permanently revoked. She can never practice psychiatry again. Her projected release is sometime in 2027.
Okay, so let's just recap where everyone is now. Pamela's in prison, license revoked. Jake is also still in prison, but his projected release is sooner, maybe 2025. And Kader, the son, caught in the middle of all this. He's living safely with his dad, Michael. Michael finally got full custody, which was what he wanted all along.
And as you can imagine, this case stirs up a lot of debate about Jake's role. How responsible was he? Some people feel, look, he committed the act. Manipulation or not, he's culpable, and maybe 9.5 years wasn't even enough. But others see Jake as a profound victim too. A young man with severe documented mental illness who was systematically targeted and exploited by the very person supposed to be helping him, his psychiatrist. From that perspective, the question becomes, why prison instead of intensive long-term psychiatric treatment? It's a really tough ethical knot.
It really is. But looking at the whole picture, the evidence, the testimony, the consensus seems pretty strong that Pamela Bookbinder was the one pulling the strings. Driven by greed, that insurance money, and the desire for sole custody, using her professional skills, her authority, in the most twisted way imaginable, which just leaves you thinking. And interestingly, the original source material we drew from actually took a moment for a completely unrelated public health message. Kind of unexpected.
Yeah, it was about the HPV vaccine. It mentioned how the vaccine helps prevent several types of cancer, cervical, oral, throat in both men and women. Cancer is often caused by the HPV virus, which is very common. The source stressed getting vaccinated, getting regular screenings, especially for cervical cancer in women. Mentioned different vaccine types exist, covering various HPV strains, basically encouraging people to talk to their doctor.
It's just an interesting choice to include that in the middle of a true crime story, isn't it? Shows how important health information can pop up anywhere, I guess. But bringing it back to this case, what's the final takeaway for you? The lasting implication?
For me, it's a stark, sobering look at what happens when trust is fundamentally broken, especially the trust placed in a healing professional. It shows how powerful psychological knowledge can be and how devastating it is when that knowledge is weaponized, twisted for incredibly dark purposes. It's a profound betrayal.
It truly is. And it leaves us asking, how do we protect vulnerable people when the supposed protectors become the predators? What safeguards can possibly be enough against that kind of manipulation? Definitely something to think about. What stands out most to you after hearing this story? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today. We hope you'll keep staying curious and exploring these complex issues with us.